Few people ever attempt to define good. What is good? Good for whom? Is there a common good, the same for all people, all tribes, all conditions of life? Or is my good your evil? Is what is good for my people evil for your people? Is good eternal and constant? Or is yesterday's good today's vice, yesterday's evil today's good? When the Last Judgment approaches, not only philosophers and preachers, but everyone on earth, literate and illiterate, will ponder the nature of good and evil. Have people advanced over the millennia in their concept of good? Is this concept something that is common to all people, both Greeks and Jews, as the apostle supposed? To all classes, nations and states, even to all animals, trees and mosses, as Buddha and his disciples claimed. The same Buddha who had to deny life in order to clothe it in goodness and love. The Christian view, 5 centuries after Buddhism, restricted the living world to which the concept of good is applicable. Not every living thing, only human beings. The good of the first Christians, which had embraced all mankind, in turn gave way to a purely Christian good. The good of the Muslims was now distinct. Centuries passed, and the good of Christianity split up into the distinct goods of Catholicism, Protestantism, and Orthodoxy, and the good of Orthodoxy gave birth to distinct goods of the old and new beliefs. At the same time, there was the good of the poor, and the good of the rich, and the good of the whites, the blacks, and the yellow races. More and more goods came into being, corresponding to each sect, race, and class. Everyone outside a particular magic circle was excluded. People began to realize how much blood had been spilt in the name of a petty, doubtful good, in the name of the struggle of this petty good against what it believed to be evil. Sometimes the very concept of good became a scourge, a greater evil than evil itself. Good of this kind is a mere husk from which the sacred kernel has been lost. Who can reclaim the lost kernel? But what is good? It used to be said that it is a thought and a related action which lead to the greater strength or triumph of humanity, or of a family, nation, state, class, or faith. People struggling for their particular good always attempt to dress it up as a universal good. They say, my good coincides with the universal good. My good is essential, not only to me, but to everyone. In achieving my good, I serve the universal good. And so the good of a sect, class, nation, or state assumes a specious universality in order to justify its struggle against an apparent evil. Even Herod did not shed blood in the name of evil. He shed blood in the name of his particular good. A new force had come into the world, a force that threatened to destroy him and his family, to destroy his friends and his favourites, his kingdom and his armies. But it was not evil that had been born, it was Christianity. Humanity had never before heard such words, "Judge not, that ye be not judged." For with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged. And with what measure ye mete, it shall be measured to you again. But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you, and persecute you. Therefore all things, whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them. For this is the law and the prophets. And what did this doctrine of peace and love bring to humanity? Byzantine iconoclasm, the tortures of the Inquisition, the struggles against heresy in France, Italy, Flanders, and Germany, the conflict between Protestantism and Catholicism, the intrigues of the monastic orders, the conflict between Nikon and Avvakum, the crushing yoke that lay for centuries over science and freedom, the Christians who wiped out the heathen population of Tasmania, the scoundrels who burnt whole Negro villages in Africa. This doctrine caused more suffering than all the crimes of the people who did evil for its own sake. In great hearts, the cruelty of life gives birth to good. They then seek to carry this good back into life, hoping to make life itself accord with their inner image of good. But life never changes to accord with an image of good. Instead, it is the image of good that sinks into the mire of life, to lose its universality, to split into fragments, and be exploited by the needs of the day. People are wrong to see life as a struggle between good and evil. Those who most wish for the good of humanity are unable to diminish evil by one jot. Great ideas are necessary in order to dig new channels, to remove stones, to bring down cliffs and fell forests. Dreams of universal good are necessary in order that great waters should flow in harmony. Yes, if the sea was able to think, then every storm would make its waters dream of happiness. Each wave breaking against the cliff would believe it was dying for the good of the sea. It would never occur to it that, like thousands of waves before and after, it had only been brought into being by the wind. Many books have been written about the nature of good and evil and the struggle between them. There's a deep and undeniable sadness in all this. Whenever we see the dawn of an eternal good that will never be overcome by evil, an evil that is itself eternal but will never succeed in overcoming good, whenever we see this dawn, the blood of old people and children is always shed. Not only men, but even God himself is powerless to lessen this evil. In Ramah there was a voice heard, lamentation and weeping, and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and would not be comforted, because they are not. What does a woman who has lost her children care about a philosopher's definition of good and evil? But what if life itself is evil? I've seen the unshakable strength of the idea of social good that was born in my own country. I saw this struggle during the period of general collectivization, and again in 1937. I saw people being annihilated in the name of an idea of good, as fine and humane as the ideal of Christianity. I saw whole villages dying of hunger. I saw peasant children dying in the snows of Siberia. I saw trains bound for Siberia with hundreds and thousands of men and women from Moscow, Leningrad, and every city in Russia, men and women who had been declared enemies of a great and bright idea of social good. This idea was something fine and noble, yet it killed some without mercy, crippled the lives of others, and separated wives from husbands and children from fathers. Now the horror of German fascism has arisen. The air is full of the groans and cries of the condemned. The sky has turned black. The sun has been extinguished by the smoke of the gas ovens. And even these crimes, crimes never before seen in the universe, even by man on earth, have been committed in the name of good. Once, when I lived in the northern forests, I thought that good was to be found neither in man, nor in the predatory world of animals and insects, but in the silent kingdom of the trees. Far from it. I saw the forest's slow movement, the treacherous way it battled against grass and bushes for each inch of soil. First, billions of seeds fly through the air and begin to sprout, destroying the grass and bushes. Then millions of victorious shoots wage war against one another, and it's only the survivors who enter into an alliance of equals to form the seamless canopy of the young deciduous forest. Beneath this canopy, the spruces and beeches freeze to death in the twilight of penal servitude. In time, the deciduous trees become decrepit. Then the heavyweight spruces burst through to the light beneath their canopy, executing the alders and the beeches. This is the life of the forest, a constant struggle of everything against everything. Only the blind conceive of the kingdom of trees and grass as the world of good. Is it that life itself is evil? Good is to be found neither in the sermons of religious teachers and prophets, nor in the teachings of sociologists and popular leaders, nor in the ethical systems of philosophers. And yet, ordinary people bear love in their hearts, are naturally full of love and pity for any living thing. At the end of the day's work, they prefer the warmth of the hearth to a bonfire in the public square. Yes, as well as this terrible good, with a capital G, is there of everyday human kindness, the kindness of an old woman carrying a piece of bread to a prisoner, the kindness of a soldier allowing a wounded enemy to drink from his water flask, the kindness of youth towards age, the kindness of a peasant hiding an old Jew in his loft, the kindness of a prison guard who risks his own liberty to pass on letters written by a prisoner not to his ideological comrades, but to his wife and mother. The private kindness of one individual towards another, a petty, thoughtless kindness, an unwitnessed kindness, something we could call senseless kindness, a kindness outside any system of social or religious good. But if we think about it, we realize that this private, senseless, incidental kindness is in fact eternal. It is extended to everything living, even to a mouse, even to a bent branch that a man straightens as he walks by. Even at the most terrible times, through all the mad acts carried out in the name of universal good and the glory of states, times when people were tossed about like branches in the wind, filling ditches and gullies like stones in an avalanche, even then this senseless, pathetic kindness remains scattered throughout life like atoms of radium. Some Germans arrived in a village to exact vengeance for the murder of 2 soldiers. The women were ordered out of their huts in the evening and set to dig a pit on the edge of the forest. There was one middle-aged woman who had several soldiers quartered in her hut. Her husband had been taken to the police station together with 20 other peasants. She didn't get to sleep until morning. The Germans found a basket of onions and a jar of honey in the cellar. They lit the stove, made themselves omelettes, and drank vodka. The eldest then played the harmonica while the rest of them sang and beat time with their feet. They didn't even look at their landlady. She might just as well have been a cat. When it grew light, they began checking their machine guns. The eldest of them jerked the trigger by mistake and shot himself in the stomach. Everyone began shouting and running about. Somehow the Germans managed to bandage the wounded man and lay him down on a bed, and then they were called outside. They signed to the woman to look after the wounded man. The woman thought to herself how simple it would be to strangle him. There he was, muttering away, his eyes closed, weeping, sucking his lips. Suddenly he opened his eyes and said in a very clear Russian, "Water, mother." "Damn you," said the woman. "What I should do is strangle you." Instead, she gave him some water. He grabbed her by the hand and signed to her to help him sit up. He couldn't breathe because of the bleeding. She pulled him up, and he clasped his arms around her neck. Suddenly there was a volley of shots outside, and the woman began to tremble. Afterwards, she told people what she had done. No one could understand, nor could she explain it herself. This senseless kindness is condemned in the fable about the pilgrim who warmed a snake in his bosom. It's the kindness that has mercy on a tarantula that's bitten a child, a mad, blind kindness. People enjoy looking in stories and fables for examples of the danger of this senseless kindness. But one shouldn't be afraid of it. One might just as well be afraid of a freshwater fish carried out by chance into the salty ocean. The harm from time to time occasioned to society, class, race, or state by this senseless kindness fades away in the light that emanates from those who are endowed with it. This kindness, this stupid kindness, is what is most truly human in a human being. It is what sets man apart, the highest achievement of his soul. No, it says, life is not evil. This kindness is both senseless and wordless. It is instinctive, blind. When Christianity clothed it in the teachings of the Church Fathers, it began to fade. its kernel became a husk. It remains potent only while it is dumb and senseless, hidden in the living darkness of the human heart, before it becomes a tool or commodity in the hands of preachers, before its crude ore is forged into the gilt coins of holiness. It is as simple as life itself. Even the teachings of Jesus deprived it of its strength. But as I lost faith in good, I began to lose faith even in kindness. It seemed as beautiful and powerless as dew. What use was it if it was not contagious? How can one make a power of it without losing it, without turning it into a husk as the church did? Kindness is powerful only while it is powerless. If man tries to give up power, it dims, fades away, loses itself, vanishes. Today I can see the true power of evil. The heavens are empty. Man is alone on earth. How can the flame of evil be put out? With small drops of living dew? With human kindness? No, not even the waters of all the clouds and seas can extinguish that flame, let alone a handful of dew gathered drop by drop from the time of the Gospels to the iron present. Yet, yes, after despairing of finding good, either in God or in nature, I began to despair even of kindness. But the more I saw of the darkness of fascism, the more clearly I realized that human qualities persist, even on the edge of the grave, even at the door of the gas chamber. My faith has been tempered in hell. My faith has emerged from the flames of the crematoria, from the concrete of the gas chamber. I have seen that it is not man who is impotent in the struggle against evil, but the power of evil that is impotent in the struggle against man. The powerlessness of kindness, of senseless kindness, is the secret of its immortality. It can never be conquered. The more stupid, the more senseless, the more helpless it may seem, the vaster it is. Evil is impotent before it. The prophets, religious teachers, reformers, social and political leaders are impotent before it. This dumb, blind love is man's meaning. Human history is not the battle of good struggling to overcome evil. It is a battle fought by a great evil struggling to crush a small kernel of human kindness. But if what is human in human beings has not been destroyed even now, then evil will never conquer. After he had finished reading, Mostovskoy sat there for a few minutes with his eyes half closed. Yes, the man who had written this was unhinged, the ruin of a feeble spirit. The preacher declares that the heavens are empty. He sees life as a war of everything against everything, and then at the end he starts tinkling the same old bells, praising the kindness of old women, hoping to extinguish a worldwide conflagration with an enema syringe. What trash! Mostovskoy looked at the grey wall of the cell and remembered the blue armchair and his conversation with Lys. He was overwhelmed by a feeling of heaviness. It wasn't his head that ached, but his heart. And he could hardly breathe. He had evidently been wrong to suspect Ikonikov. The scribblings of this holy fool aroused the same contempt in his nighttime interrogate as they did in himself. He thought once again about his own attitude towards Chernetsov, and about the hatred and contempt with which the Gestapo officer had talked about people like him. The confusion and depression that gripped him seemed heavier than any physical suffering. Seryotsa Shaposhnikov pointed to a book that was lying on top of a brick beside a haversack. "Have you read that?" he asked Katya Vengrova. "I was looking through it again." "Do you like it?" "I prefer Dickens." "Dickens?" said Seryotsa in a tone of mockery and condescension. "What about La Chartreuse de Parme? Do you like that?" asked Katya. "Not much," replied Seryotsa, after a moment's thought. Then he added, I'm going with the infantry today to clean out the Germans from the shack next door. Katya looked at him. Understanding the meaning of this look, Seryozha went on, Yes, I've been ordered to by Grekov. What about Chentsov and the rest of the mortar team? Are they going? No, just me. They fell silent for a moment. Is he after you, then? Asked Seryozha. She nodded her head. How do you feel about it? You know very well, she said, thinking of the tribe of Azra who die in silence when they love. I'm afraid they'll get me today, said Seryozha. Why are you being sent with the infantry anyway? You're a mortar man. Why is Grekov keeping you here, for that matter? Your wireless set's been smashed to pieces. You should have been sent back to the regiment ages ago. You should have been sent to the left bank. You're just hanging around doing nothing. Well, at least we see each other every day. Seryozha gave a wave of the hand and walked away. Katya looked round and saw Bunchuk looking down from above and laughing. Seryozha must have seen him too, and that was why he had left so abruptly. The Germans kept the building under artillery fire until evening. 3 men were slightly wounded, and a partition wall collapsed, blocking the exit from the cellar. They dug out the exit, only for it to be choked with rubble again after another shell smashed into the wall. They dug their way through a second time. And Siferov peered into the dust-filled darkness and asked, Hey, comrade, radio operator, are you still with us? Yes, answered Katya, sneezing and spitting out red dust. Bless you, said Ansiferov. When it got dark, the Germans sent up flares and opened up with their machine guns. A plane flew over several times, dropping incendiary bombs. No one in the building slept. Grekov himself manned a machine gun. The infantry sallied out twice to repel advancing Germans, swearing for all they were worth and shielding their faces with spades. It was as though the Germans had foreseen the impending attack on the nearby building they had just occupied. When the firing died down, Katya could hear the Germans calling out to one another. She could even hear their laughter. Their pronunciation was very different from that of her German teachers. She noticed that the cat had crawled off its pile of rags. Its back legs were quite motionless. It was dragging itself along on its forepaws, trying desperately to reach Katya. Then it came to a stop. Its jaw opened and closed several times. Katya tried to raise one of its eyelids. So it's dead, she thought in disgust. Then she realized that the cat must have thought of her when he realized he was about to die, that he had crawled towards her when he was half paralyzed. She put the body in a hole and covered it over with bits of brick. The cellar was suddenly lit up by a flare. It was as though there were no longer any air, as though she were breathing some blood-coloured liquid that flowed out of the ceiling, oozing out of each little brick. Maybe the Germans would appear any moment out of the far corners of the cellar. They'd come up to seize her and drag her away. Or maybe they were cleaning up the first floor right now. The rattle of their Tommy guns sounded closer than ever. Maybe they were about to appear through the hole in the ceiling. To calm herself down, she tried to picture the list of tenants on the floor of her house, on the door of her house. Tikmitrov, 1 ring. Ziga, 2 rings. Cheremushkin, 3 rings. Feinberg, 4 rings. Vengrova, 5 rings. Andriushenko, 6 rings. Pegov, 1 long ring. She tried to imagine the Feinberg's big saucepan standing on the kerosene stove with its plywood cover. Anastasia's washing tub with its cover made of sacking. The Tikimov's chipped enamel basin hanging from its piece of string. Now she would make her bed. Where the springs were particularly sharp, she would spread out an old torn coat, a scrap of quilt, and her mother's brown shawl. Then her thoughts turned to house 6-1. Now the Germans were so close. Now they were actually tunnelling their way through the ground. She no longer felt upset by the soldiers' found language. She didn't even feel frightened by the way Grekov looked at her. Previously, not only her cheeks had blushed, but even her neck and shoulders. Yes, she certainly had heard some obscenities during her months in the army. There had been one particularly unpleasant conversation with a bald lieutenant colonel who had flashed his metal fillings at her as he had explained what she must do if she wanted to stay on the left bank at the signals centre. She remembered a mournful little song the girls used to sing under their breath. Under a fine autumn moon, the commander took her to bed. He kissed her till it was dawn, and now she belongs to the men. The first time she'd seen Seriozza, he'd been reading poetry. She thought to herself, what an idiot. Then he'd disappeared for 2 days. She kept wondering if he'd been killed, but had been too embarrassed to ask. And then he'd suddenly reappeared during the night. She had heard him tell Grekov how he'd left headquarters without permission. Quite right, said Grekov. Otherwise you wouldn't have rejoined us until the next world. After that he'd walked straight past her without even a glance. She had felt first upset and then angry. Once again she'd thought, what an idiot. Soon afterwards she had heard a discussion about who was likely to be the first man to sleep with her. Someone had said, Grekov, that's a certainty. No, that's not for sure, someone else had said. But I can tell you who's at the bottom of the list, young Seriozza. The younger a girl is, the more she needs someone with experience. Then she noticed that the other men had stopped joking and flirting with her. Grekov made it very clear that he didn't like anyone else making a play for her. And once Zubarev called out, Hey, Mrs. House Manager! Grekov was in no hurry, but he was very sure of himself. She could feel this all too clearly. After a wireless set had been smashed, he had ordered her to make her home in one of the far corners of the cellar, and yesterday he had said, I've never met a girl like you before. If I'd met you before the war, I'd have made you my wife. She wanted to reply that he'd have had to ask her view on the matter first, but she'd been too frightened to say anything at all. He hadn't done anything wrong. He hadn't even said anything coarse or brazen, but she was frightened. Later on in the day he'd said sadly, The Germans are about to launch their offensive. Probably not one of us will be left alive. This building lies right in their path. He had then given her a long, thoughtful look, a look that Katya found more frightening than what he'd said about the German offensive, and added, I'll come round sometime. The link between this remark and what he'd said before was by no means obvious, but Katya understood it. He was very different from any of the officers she'd seen round at Kotluban. He never threatened people or shouted at them, but they obeyed him. He just sat there, smoking and chatting away like one of the soldiers, and yet his authority was immense. She'd never really talked to Seriozza. Sometimes she thought he was in love with her, but as powerless as she herself before the man they admired, and was terrified by. She knew he was weak and inexperienced, but he kept wanting to ask for his protection, to say, Come and sit by me. And then there were times when she wanted to comfort him herself. Talking to him was very strange. It often seemed as though there were no war, no House 6-1 at all. Seriozza appeared to understand this, and tried to adopt a coarse, soldierly manner. Once he even swore in her presence. Now she felt that there was some terrible link between her own confused thoughts and feelings and the fact that Seriozza had been ordered to join the storming party. Listening to the Tommy gun fire, she imagined Seriozza lying across a mound of red brick, his lifeless head and unkempt hair drooping. She felt a heart-rending sense of pity for him. Everything merged together. The many-coloured flares, her memories of her mother, her simultaneous fear and admiration of Grekov, this man who, from a few isolated ruins, was about to launch an assault on the ironclad German divisions. She felt ready to sacrifice everything in the world, if only she could see Seriozza again alive. But what if I have to choose between him and Mama? She thought suddenly. Then she heard footsteps. Her fingers tensed against the bricks. The shooting died down. There was a sudden silence. Her back, her shoulders, her legs all began to itch. She wanted to scratch them, but was afraid of making a noise. People had kept asking Batrakov why he was always scratching himself. He'd always answered, "It's just nerves." And then suddenly he'd said, "I've just found 11 lice." Kolomaitsev had made fun of him. "Batrakov's been attacked by nerve lice." She had been killed. Soldiers were dragging her corpse to a pit and saying, "Poor girl, she's covered in lice." Perhaps it really was just her nerves. Then she saw a man coming towards her out of the darkness, and not just someone she'd conjured up out of the strange noises and the flickering light. "Who is it?" she asked. "Don't be afraid," said the darkness. "It's me. The attack's been put off till tomorrow. Today it's the Germans' turn. And by the way, I wanted to tell you, I've never read La Chartreuse de Parme." Katya didn't answer. Seryozha tried to make her out in the darkness, as though in answer to his wish, her face was suddenly lit up by a shell burst. A second later it was dark again. As though by unspoken agreement, they waited for another shell burst, another flash of light. Seryozha took her by the hand and squeezed her fingers. It was the first time he had held a girl's hand. The dirty, lice-ridden girl sat there without saying a word. Seryozha could see her white neck in the darkness. Another flare went up, and their heads drew together. He put his arms around her, and she closed her eyes. They had both of them heard the same saying at school: "If you kiss with your eyes open, you're not in love." "This is the real thing, isn't it?" asked Seryozha. She pressed her hands against his temples and turned his head towards her. "This is for all our lives," he said slowly. "How strange," she said. "I'm afraid somebody may come by. Until now I was only too delighted to see any of them. Lyakov, Kolomaitsev, Zubarev." "Grekov," added Seryozha. "No," she said firmly. He kissed her on the neck and undid the metal button on her tunic. He pressed his lips to her thin collarbone, but didn't touch her breasts. She stroked his wiry, unwashed hair, as though he were a little boy. She knew that all this was right and inevitable. He looked at the luminous dial of his watch. "Who's leading you tomorrow?" she asked. "Grekov?" "Why ask now? Who needs a leader anyway?" He embraced her again. He felt a sudden cold in his fingers and chest, a sudden resolute excitement. She was half lying on her coat. She seemed to be hardly breathing. He felt the coarse, dusty material of her tunic and skirt, and then the rough fur of her boots. He sensed the warmth of her body. She tried to sit up, but he began kissing her again. Another flash of light lit up Katya's cap, now lying on some bricks, and her face, suddenly unfamiliar, as though he had never seen it before. Then it became dark again, very dark. "Katya? What is it?" "Nothing, I just wanted to hear your voice. Why don't you look at me?" He lit a match. Don't, put it out." Once again she wondered who she loved most, him or her mother. "Forgive me," she said. Failing to understand her, Seryozha said, "It's all right. Don't be afraid. This is for life if we live." "No, I was just thinking of my mother." "Well, my mother's dead. I've only just realized she was deported because of my father." They went to sleep in each other's arms. During the night the house manager came and looked at them. Shaposhnikov had his head on the girl's shoulder and his arm round her back. It looked as though they were afraid of losing her. Their sleep was so quiet and so still, they might have been dead. At dawn, Lyakov looked in and shouted, "Oi, Shaposhnikov! Vengrova! The house manager wants you, at the double!" In the cold, misty half-light, Grekov's face looked severe and implacable. He was leaning against the wall, his tousled hair hanging over his low forehead. They stood in front of him, shifting from foot to foot, unaware they were still holding hands. Grekov flared his broad nostrils and said, "Very well, Shaposhnikov. I'm sending you back to regimental headquarters." Seryota could feel Katya's fingers trembling. He squeezed them. She in turn felt his fingers trembling. He swallowed. His tongue and palate were quite dry. The earth and the clouded sky were enveloped in silence. The soldiers, lying in a huddle on their greatcoats, seemed wide awake, hardly breathing, waiting. Everything was so familiar, so splendid. Seryota thought to himself, "We're being expelled from paradise. He's separating us like two serfs." He gave Grekov a look of mingled hatred and entreaty. Grekov narrowed his eyes as he looked Katya full in the face. Seryota felt there was something quite horrible about this look, something insolent and merciless. "That's all," said Grekov, "and the radio operator can go with you. There's no need for her to hang around here with nothing to do. You can show her the way to HQ." He smiled. "After that you'll have to find your own ways. Here, take this. I can't stand paperwork, so I've just written one for the two of you, all right?" Seryota suddenly realized that never in all his life had he seen eyes that were so sad and so intelligent, so splendid, yet so human. In the end, Regimental Commander Pivovarov never visited House 6-1. Radio contact had been broken off. No one knew if this was because the wireless set was out of action or because the high-handed Grekov was fed up with being ordered about by his superiors. Chentsov, a party member, had provided them with some information about the encircled house. He said that the house manager was corrupting the minds of his soldiers with the most appalling heresies. He didn't, however, deny either Grekov's courage or his fighting abilities. Just when Pivovarov was about to make his way to House 6-1, Boyorozkin, the commanding officer of the regiment, fell seriously ill. He was lying in his bunker. His face was burning. His eyes looked transparent and vacuous. The doctor who examined him was at a loss. He was used to dealing with shattered limbs and fractured skulls. And now here was someone who had fallen ill all by himself. "We need cupping glasses," he said, "but where on earth can I find any?" Pivovarov was about to inform Boyorozkin's superiors when the telephone rang and the divisional commissar summoned him to headquarters. Pivovarov twice dropped flat on his face because of nearby shell bursts. He arrived somewhat out of breath. The divisional commissar was in conversation with a battalion commissar who had recently been sent across from the left bank. Pivovarov had heard of him before. He'd given lectures to the units in the factories. Pivovarov announced himself loudly, "Pivovarov's reporting." Then he told him of Boyorozkin's illness. "Yeah, that's a bit of a bastard," said the divisional commissar. "Well, you'll have to take command yourself, Comrade Pivovarov." "What about the encircled house?" "Oh, that matter's no longer in your hands. You wouldn't believe what a storm there's been over it. It's even reached front headquarters." He paused and held up a coded message. "In fact, that's the very reason I called you. Comrade Krimov here has instructions from the political administration of the front to get through to the encircled house, take over as commissar, and establish Bolshevik order. If any problems arise, he's to take over from Grekov. Since this is in the sector covered by your regiment, you're to provide Comrade Krimov with whatever help he needs to get through and remain in communication. Is that clear?" "Certainly," said Pivovarov. "I'll see to it." Then, in a conversational tone of voice, he asked Krimov, "Comrade Battalion Commissar, have you dealt with anything like this before?" "I have indeed," smiled Krimov. "In the summer of 41, I led 200 men out of encirclement in the Ukraine. Believe me, I know a thing or two about all this partisan nonsense." "Very well, Comrade Krimov," said the divisional commissar. "Get on with it and keep in touch. A state within a state is something we can do without." "Yes," said Pivovarov, "and there was also an unpleasant story about some girl who was sent as a radio operator." Bioroskin was very worried when the transmitter went dead. Those lads are capable of anything, believe me. Ah, very well. You can sort that one out when you get there. I wish you luck, said the divisional commissar.